Thank you very much for inviting me to your very excellent institution. I also have this. Okay.
It's yours.
That's mine. Thank you very much. And my talk is going to follow on a bit both from Yan's and Zuoxi's that you just heard before. And it's based on materials over a number of years, but mostly from this past year, 2023. Sorry, I'll put this over here.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm new to glasses, and it means that I need it to read my paper, but not for anything else. So once I put them on, I'm blind to anything in my surroundings except for the paper. So please forgive me. I'll go ahead and start now. Climate change raises both cosmic and ecological questions. Perhaps nowhere is this more apparent than in the harnessing of new energy technologies to mitigate against extreme weather events. Wind turbines, solar panels, and electricity pylons are being rolled out worldwide to forestall, among other things, the mass migrations of people, animals, insects, viruses, and even plants to more habitable spaces. Yet for the Nongsu, this group we've been talking about today, a Tibeto-Burman group, and the Liangshan or Cool Mountains of southwest China, new energy technologies have brought about the new concern that they may make whole mountains uninhabitable to local land spirits, which are typically envisioned as mountain spirits because Liangshan is a land composed of mountains. Many Nongsu consider that their mountain spirits prefer to reside in peaceful settings, where they occasionally take on the form of wild animals, such as pigeons, deer, boar, or large snakes. To ensure that their mountain spirits provide them with abundant grains, livestock, wild produce, and wild animals, many Nongsu also hold what Zuoxi has just been talking to us about, the annual sacrifice to the mountain spirit, or to the land spirit. But mountain spirits may do more than enhance traditional Nongsu ways of making a living through agriculture, pastoralism, forestry, and hunting. They may make all kinds of dreams a reality, which throws revealing light on the resources needed to obtain these dreams in the first place. Dream-fulfilling resources, such as the good weather needed to grow abundant crops, are in fact the stuff of dreams themselves. Put differently, they are the dreams that lie behind the dreams that a mountain spirit may fulfill. However, when mountain spirits are disturbed, they may relocate to other locations that are far away, effectively abandoning Nongsu people and taking their dream-fulfilling capacities away with them. Mountain spirits are ascribed somewhat different qualities and even different origins across the highlands and uplands of Liangshan. Not all Nongsu, also known by their Chinese ethnonym of Yi, will find that their mountain spirits were originally Nongsu spirits. Many Nongsu in the Ninglang Yi Autonomous County of Yunnan Province, which I'm hereafter going to refer to by short with its Nongsu name of Nila, they consider that mountain spirits were brought to their area by the Purmi, a different Tibeto-Burman group whose religious life combines animistic and Buddhist elements. So on this slide you'll see on top, both of the top photos are of Nongsu doing various rituals, and beneath it, we're having photos and scriptures that are actually Purmi. So my fieldwork in Liangshan, which I've conducted since 2007, is unfolded chiefly in Nila, where, like the Nongsu, many Purmi have migrated from Sichuan province over roughly the last century and a half. Nila is actually officially home to 12 different nationalities of China, including the Han ethnic majority. And across the county, Nongsu tend to ascribe to the popular notion that there were in fact no mountain spirits in the area until the Purmi brought them with them from Sichuan. Some Nongsu later inherited these mountain spirits during skirmishes in which they seized the lands of Purmi and other ethnic groups, whom they also often captured as serfs and slaves, until China dismantled their slaveholding practices in the democratic reforms of the mid to late 1950s. Other Nongsu have only recently identified a mountain spirit in their area, which may have relocated there, or in fact lived alongside of them for years, if not generations, without them even knowing. When Nongsu and Nila identify a mountain spirit in their area, they often establish a sacrificial contract with it. This contract may be initiated by Nongsu priests or male shamans or even ordinary people, some of whom may be custodians of folk knowledge with a particular knack for holding folk rituals that don't require a priest or a shaman, although the expectation is that the person leading the sacrifice to the mountain spirit will be a man. To seal the contract, Nongsu slaughter in this area, Zuoxi just kindly was telling us about the slaughtering of a sheep. Here I'm having it in Nila where you slaughter a cockerel to the mountain spirit, while beseeching it to fulfill various dreams and wishes for the year ahead. Ordinary people tend to address the mountain spirit with a vocal performance style that is reminiscent of how priests chant their scriptures. melding the poetic wording, lilt, and cadence of priestly texts together with their own imaginative delivery of those priestly texts. Ordinary Nulsu bring to life what could be called a scriptural voicing, in which they allow voice and text to respond to each other. Just as Nulsu melds script into voice when holding sacrifices to mountain spirits, so mountain spirits respond to changes in their terrain with a pronounced sensitivity. Many Nulsu consider that mountain spirits are unsettled by loud or persistent noises and other large disturbances, which may encourage them to move house and relocate somewhere else. New energy technologies can be especially disturbing to mountain spirits because their large support stands that must be installed deeply into the earth. They actually break up the topsoil around them in ways that can lead, for example, to soil erosion, causing soil to go down the mountain sides. Rainwater and dew can settle into that broken soil, carrying the soil away with them when draining down the slopes. And that can eventually mean that these areas no longer support even the grass needed for grazing livestock, potentially. Mountain spirits may also be disturbed by the noise pollution caused by the rotating blades of wind turbines that resembles a low but incessant droning sound that many people find disturbing not only to Nulsu people, but to livestock, wild animals, and potentially other creatures. So it should come as no surprise that many Nulsu people find that an unsettled kind of feeling creeps up on them just by thinking about how renewable energy sources might affect their mountain spirits. Even those people who claim that mountain spirits can and eventually must get used to new technologies, they often nervously admit that this doesn't mean these spirits will not abandon their terrain each time they are disturbed. The dilemmas wrought by climate change and the growing need for renewable energy are therefore often melded into these sacrificial addresses to the mountain spirit, which is asked not to leave the area even when people plow the earth or dig up the land. I mean, we note quite interestingly with the previous talk with Zulshi, how they were saying there was like a 3 to 7 day moratorium after the ritual, don't dig anything. And it's in this kind of spirit. But convincing the mountain spirit to make dreams and wishes a reality, including the wish for it to offer its protection well into the future, is never an easy feat. While the sacrifice to the mountain spirit is dramatically simpler and shorter than many other Nulsu rituals that can be quite involved, it requires the person conducting it to be fluent in his powers of persuasion. Everyday life is filled with events where people upset the mountain spirit, usually inadvertently, by breaking taboos about wood harvesting, hunting wild animals, collecting other wild resources in its terrain, and so forth. Any of these violations can bring hailstorms or other supernatural forms of retribution that are difficult to stop. So many people seek to make a sacrificial contract with the mountain spirit, which would encourage the spirit to join them in fostering a more relational encounter involving mutual adjustment and responsivity to the obligations and commitments, both on the human side and on the side of the mountain spirits. But of course, when the mountain spirit abandons its terrain, it not only breaks its sacrificial contract with the people living in the area, but makes it impossible for them to secure another sacrificial contract until another mountain spirit appears again in the future, if and when that may ever happen. So I'm going to be setting out in this talk to show how Nulsu harness both script and voice to build responsive relations with their mountain spirits. And I'm going to be starting with the popular Nulsu sentiment that mountain spirits shouldn't be disturbed, including by the new energy technologies that are increasingly being installed across Liangshan. And this view pervades the sacrifice to the mountain spirit, which I'm going to describe in some detail, before turning to the creative use of script and voice within it. And from there, I'll give you some passages from the transcription of a sacrifice held in 2018. It was conducted by an ordinary Nulsu person, not a priest, from the Jieze lineage in Nila. And these passages will revealingly suggest that the greatest dream-fulfilling requests that Nulsu can make of their mountain spirits, at least in Nila, is for them to tolerate every kind of disturbance. And finally, I'll conclude with reflections on how these scriptural voicings support the social lives of dreams, of mountain spirits, and of new energy technologies. By melding script into voice, Nulsu seek to ensure a livable future for everyone, including their mountain spirits, and the hopes that they will not migrate away, but that they will choose instead to remain in place. So the Nulsu idea that mountain spirits prefer to live in peace is captured in a phrase that the ethno historian, who I call Misu, coined for me in late July 2023, which is literally, do not disturb the mountain spirit. And in fact, Misu was pleased when I compared his vision of the mountain spirit to the signs that hotel guests may hang from their doorknobs to ensure that they are not disturbed. But as he explained, it's important not to confuse the calm and peaceful lives the mountain spirits want with a lifestyle of sleep and rest. Mountain spirits are often active in their terrain, even if they prefer to inhabit quiet places. So Misu added that some Nulsu feel that mountain spirits fear new energy technologies because they are enormous and may be made in part or whole of iron, which adds to their imposing qualities. Many people are unsettled, even by the thought, as I mentioned before, that new energy technologies might disturb a mountain spirit and cause it to leave the area. But Misu furthermore noted that Nulsu hold various views about new energy technologies, including the view that they're actually good because they create clean energy. A fortnight later, all of Misu's thoughts echoed in my mind when I visited a country village of Nila County that was situated amid mountains, every single one of which, except for one, had a wind turbine installed on it. And I fixed my eyes on this one empty mountain and I wondered kind of aloud, could this be the seat of the mountain spirit? And if this is why there's no new energy technologies on it? And some villagers listening to me said, yeah, you're correct. This is what we made sure happened. So, building on this point about not disturbing mountain spirits, Misu told me that sacrificial contracts are made to them, and everyone participating in the sacrifice will first go to the top of a mountain where the mountain spirit resides, and there they will set up a wooden altar that has had its bark stripped clean from it so that it appears white or kind of pale in color. And the altar is usually of a modest size in Nila, it's not very huge, and it's placed near to either a tree or a stone that represents the mountain spirit during the sacrifice. So we just saw in Zulshi's talk an example of a stone being the main representative, and in my talk it happened to be a tree. Having decked out the altar with cups of tea, which should have some salt added to them, as well as with cups of alcohol, the person who's holding the sacrifice tells the mountain spirit that if it is good to him this year, then it's going to receive another sacrifice in the following year. And Mises stressed that this statement is presented in very beautiful wording, and that the sacrificant then takes hold of a live cockerel, which should ideally be white or red colored, and declares to the mountain spirit that it is alive before inviting the mountain spirit to come have it. As the cockerel is being killed, everyone else participating in the ritual takes up a cup of tea as well as a cup of alcohol to drink. And a second round of tea and alcohol is then poured into the cups for everyone to drink. Once the cockerel is killed, it is laid out on the altar, and the person who sacrifices it tells the mountain spirit something to the effect of, I gave you a live cockerel. Now I give you a well-sacrificed one. I need you to protect us now. Be at peace. At this point, the cockerel is removed from the altar. Its inner organs are roasted after they're removed. Its wings are then roasted, and the rest of the meat is boiled. Half of the cooked cockerel is placed into a basin with some bitter buckwheat cakes. This is traditional dietary fare for Nulsu. And that's all placed back on the altar for the mountain spirit that breathes in its fragrance to consume it, before everyone participating in the sacrifice ideally has another drink of tea and alcohol while feasting on the cockerel on top of the mountain in the style of a grand picnic. Any small leftover bits of the chicken meat should be brought home to the family members of those participating in the ritual, provided they're at home and available, so that they can partake of it at a distance in their homes. And you can think in particular of the women, because this is a ritual that's not often participated in by women, but you can actually transport some of its effects after it's said and done. So Misu explained that some people hold a sacrifice to the mountain spirit actually 2 or 3 times a year, and others don't even hold it once a year. Not everyone can conduct this sacrifice. It tends to be held in certain seasons that are transitional, like spring or autumn, but it could be any time of the year. That's because the transitional seasons are just before the rainfall, and it does have something to do with getting good weather and good crops from the mountain spirit. And usually these sacrifices are held exclusively for and by a group of relatives who won't tell anyone else that they meet en route to the sacrifice what they're going to be doing. It's a bit of a secret. And Misu says, I don't know why there's secrecy around the sacrifices. Maybe it has something to do with the unsettled feeling that people get about the mountain spirit being disturbed. But it may also boil down to the fact that making a sacrificial contract with the mountain spirit is a high stakes venture. If it's done well, it can make many important wishes and dreams a reality. So great care tends to be taken during the sacrifices, especially in terms of how people pair their voices with their imaginative reflections on the priestly script, even if it's a layperson doing this ritual, which can be happening. So there's arguably no greater wish that Nulsu can make of the mountain spirit than for it to remain committed to its sacrificial contract, and not leave the area even if you dig up the earth. And knowing this is a big request, many people set out to convince their mountain spirits to make their dreams a reality. Priests can chant the specific scripture used for making sacrifices to the mountain spirits. This text exists. Ordinary people can model their sacrifices on their own memories, impressions, and reflections of what they've heard priests say when they chant the scriptures. Anyone conducting the sacrifice may potentially draw on Nulsu myth histories, legends, other aesthetically pleasing works that tend to take both oral and textual form, such as the Nulsu Book of Origins, which, among other things, recounts the genealogies of people, plants, animals, and other beings. They may build on their many creation stories for beings and things, oral poetry riffs using verbal dueling competitions, and anything that might be part of a traditional contest of knowledge. And beyond this, they may harness their experiences of addressing gods and spirits during seasonal rituals conducted at home for the annual fire festival and Nulsu New Year. So we have a photo on the upper right and on the lower left, and those are both taken from different parts of the fire festival. The other two photos on the upper left and lower right are from just various kinds of Nulsu rituals, generally speaking. People who are custodians of folk knowledge, meaning they're ordinary people, but they have a little bit more kind of specialist knowledge, they can conduct some rituals better than the average layperson. They may also make use of their experience in conducting whatever rituals they're asked to do that don't require a priest or shaman. But above all, the ordinary person tends to build on what they've heard and maybe even read of priestly scriptures used during the sacrifice to the mountain spirit. I say maybe even read because most Nulsu are not necessarily fluent in reading their mother tongue, but they may have had a little bit of self-teaching or other ways of learning. So ordinary people tend to meld the rhetorical style of priestly scriptures with the intonation of priestly chanting to make vocal deliveries pleasing and convincing. And all of this is to say there's different kinds of creativity at play here. Text and voice and the sacrifice to the mountain spirit stand in this relation of mutual adjustment and responsivity. It parallels the relations between people and mountain spirits. Priests and ordinary people alike creatively give voice to their own distinct understandings of the scripture that priests use to draw mountain spirits into a sacrificial contract. They share the same goal of convincing the mountain spirit to abide by the contract, no matter how much is disturbed. Because the written and the spoken are mutually constituted in every sacrifice, they can only be understood in full as a kind of what we might call script orality, one word where we take the vocal and the written and smash it into one concept. At the same time, most ordinary people have neither the intimate knowledge nor the intimate relationship to the scriptures that priests obtain through their lifelong work with the Nulsu script. And this means ordinary people tend to unleash a creativity that is built more on mimicry than on full fluency. Drawing on their creative sense of the priestly use of text and voice, many ordinary people approach mountain spirits with a form of script orality that's pitched at a kind of meta level. Okay, so these scriptural voicings I've been talking about lead to more than sacrificial contracts and responsive relations between people and spirits. They actually shape the social lives of dreams, mountain spirits, and new energy technologies. Every sacrificial contract is a two-way agreement, so many people tend to keep track of how their mountain spirit responds to it over the course of years and what this may reveal about the mountain spirit's own specific temperament. Beyond the general preference that mountain spirits have for living in a peaceful area, they respond particularly well to specific aspects of a sacrifice. I'm talking about the mountain spirits here. They're not all the same. They kind of have different personalities. Some are more likely to fulfill certain kinds of dreams. Some have a particular level of tolerance for disturbances caused by breaking taboos, whether accidental or intentional. Some may have a higher tolerance for those new energy technologies. And when Nulsu build up a detailed imaginary of how their mountain spirit responds based on their own observations over the course of years, they can feed these observations into the performance of their next sacrifice. It means that sacrifices can have a little bit of room for maneuverability and creativity and innovation. So people factor in knowledge that has been tried and tested with their spirits. Okay, let me now show concretely how this creative melding of script and voice works through a specific sacrifice to the mountain spirit that took place in the home village of the Nulsu anthropologist I call Tosa on the 16th of November, 2018. And Tosa himself joined this sacrifice together with his relatives in Nila. He made an audio recording of it that he transcribed into Chinese. So 5 years later, in August 2023, when we were there on fieldwork, Tosa suggested that we meet with the ethnohistorian I've talked about before, Misu. We meet in his office and spend the day translating his transcription into English, make a three-way translation. And although Tosa is a native Nulsu speaker, he transcribed his recording into Chinese because, like many Nulsu, he's fully fluent in written Chinese, but less fluent in writing his mother tongue. The Misu, he's fluent in all of these Chinese, Nulsu, no problem, routinely translates between it for his own work. So after he made that text go into Nulsu, the three of us got to work creating that English translation. And we were huddled around Misu's old desktop computer that you see here on the slide, and we viewed the document with the priest scripture for the sacrifice to the mountain spirit, just briefly. And Misu confirmed, look, the priest version is nearly identical to the version that the ordinary people gave, that Tulsa had recorded. The exception being they include the names of different mountains. Whereas the priest version names mountains that are famous all across Liangshan and important to Nulsu at large, Tulsa's transcription addresses the local mountain spirit in his home village of Nila, called Wujia Mountain, and it's named after a Wang family, like Wang is in Chinese, that were the former Han leaders of the area but pushed out of the area by a previous generation of Nulsu. And as we took our seats for the translation, Tulsa explained, this sacrifice is composed of 4 parts: calling the mountain spirit, sacrifice to the mountain spirit, sending back the mountain spirit, and final words. And he pointed out that each part of the sacrifice uses similar, even repetitive wording that makes it more accessible and easier to remember, right, if an ordinary person does this. So not long into our translation work, I also started to notice that the differences between each part illuminate both the different moments in the sacrifice and the increasingly confident, decisive, and persuasive ways in which the mountain spirit is asked to fulfill dreams. Or at least I was noticing this in terms of how Tulsa suggested we saw the verbal tense changes in English. And it turned out that one of Tulsa's uncles, an ordinary person from the same lineage, Jieza, and this uncle's name was Anyo, he conducted the sacrifice. So I'm going to be pairing here a summary of Tulsa's text with an analysis of how Anyo creatively melded his sense of script and voice into the sacrifice to the Wujia mountain spirit. Okay. So Anyo starts the sacrifice by announcing that it's a good month, year, day in the Nulsu calendar, on which the 12 animals of the astrological cycle are all in a good state of affairs. He then calls the Wujia mountain spirit to the specific tree, in this case it's a tree or stone, it's a tree here, chosen to represent it at the site of the sacrifice, and asks it to come when summoned, invited, loudly called to, quietly called to, and invoked, adding the tempting refrain that it will be a pity if it does not come. To persuade the mountain spirit further, he poetically describes the sacrificial meat and tea laid out amply as though on platters piled up high, noting that the roasted meat and salt on offer is attractive to all the livestock, wild animals, and birds in the area. Beseeching the mountain spirit again to reply when summoned and come when invited, Anyo urges it to maintain its relation of mutual adjustment and responsivity with those participating in the sacrifice. His request is presented in light of the sacrificial contract that all those participating, who Anyo names as the descendants of Jieza Alu, a man of the Jieza lineage, all those people have maintained by worshiping the mountain spirit last year, just as they are worshiping it this year. Telling the mountain spirit that it is their master and father while they are its children, Anyo describes the responsive relation as that of a father who shares the love that his children have for him and whose children are looked after by their father. At this point, Anyo asks for the responsive relation to spread to each side of Wujia Mountain, to its front, to its back, to its left, and its right, where the descendants of Alu have worshipped it generation after generation. Urging the mountain spirit to respond in kind, Anyo asks it to propagate the many descendants, many livestock, and all the grains of the participants at the sacrifice before emphatically declaring a line that becomes recurrent throughout this whole ritual. Our request should be fulfilled and our dreams should be made a reality. Then Anyo waxes lyrical about the kinds of dreams that should be made real, stating that his descendants should be so lucky as to find the easy hunting catches of pheasants wounded by eagles on the mountainside, lone wild boars on mountaintops, and old white-tailed musk deer that are slow-moving in forests. They should also be so lucky as to encounter ownerless horses on the road, like you see on the slide here, enjoy delicious feasts when visiting neighbors. You also have an image of that. Have good business in the marketplace, and get hold of books bound with gold and silver. We didn't know why this was coming up as a theme. I actually wondered about the influence maybe of Tibetan lamas nearby, but perhaps that's something for the questions. Wrapping up this first part of the sacrifice, Anyo implores the mountain spirit to ensure that the responsive relationship between them spreads to all sides of Wujia Mountain, so that anyone who exhibits the bad behavior of tearing off the mountain spirit's ground cover, this is his clothes, or cutting down his trees or digging up its herbs, will be accorded the proper punishments, including having his or her livestock and grains destroyed. Here, Anyo draws a contrast between any bad behavior and the exemplary behavior of the descendants of Alu, the people holding the right, by reminding the mountain spirit again that they made offerings to it last year and this year. Having reached the right moment, he urges the mountain spirit to fulfill their requests and make their dreams a reality. A few more lines are voiced to signal that the descendants of Alu have the protection of the mountain spirit and their ancestors, who are protecting their speech and actions, in the knowledge that they have promised to make more offerings again this year and next year once their requests and dreams have been brought to fruition. Adding one last flourish to tempt the mountain spirit again, Anyo adds that shimmering tea and fragrant wine are awaiting it, along with roasted meat and tea bricks piled up high so that it will be a pity if it does not come. Many of the same requests for the mountain spirit to maintain this mutually responsive relation of shared obligations and commitments appear in the second part of the sacrifice. But here Anyo starts off by making the onomatopoeic sound shul, shul, shul on repeat, as Mulsu often do when purifying the ritual ground to send away unwanted ghosts, spirits, and unclean things. The mountain spirit is then told that the sacrificial offerings are in place, with shimmering tea and fragrant wine awaiting it, before being presented with the somewhat more insistent phrasing that it is coming when it is summoned, invited, and invoked. Anya reminds the mountain spirit that the descendants of Alu worshipped it last year and are worshiping it this year before specifically naming the other members of the lineage attending the present ritual, Vati Jazutrunder and himself, who he requests will be healthy, have many livestock, and be so lucky as to find the same easy hunting catches mentioned in the first part of the sacrifice, as well as the same ownerless horses on the road, delicious feasts when visiting neighbors, good business in the marketplace, and books bound with gold and silver. Exhorting the mountain spirit to fulfill their requests and make their dreams a reality, he reiterates that the mountain spirit is a master and a father to Nulsu people who are its subjects and children. He directs his address at each side of Wojia Mountain, saying that anyone who tears off the mountain spirit's ground cover should have their money destroyed, and adds, as an embellishment on the previous part of the sacrifice, that they should be punished with insanity and the loss of their property. This is a specific effect in this particular village that the mountain spirit has historically had. It's found its way into the ritual now. Comparing this to the descendants of Alu, who worship the mountain spirit generation by generation, Anyo asks for them to be protected and have many descendants and livestock. Then he alludes for the first time in the sacrifice to their wish for the mountain spirit to stay rather than move away from its terrain. Insisting again that the mountain spirit is coming when summoned, invited, and invoked, he states that it will partake of the beautiful sacrificial foods when it returns to its own place. Imagery of the mountain spirit's return to its station are paired with a request for it to resume its duties just as the stone, in the case of the stone that's chosen to represent the mountain spirit in the sacrifice, we saw that in the previous talk, or just as the mare's yew, a particular tree, that is often chosen to represent the mountain spirit in the sacrifice. We're looking at that in this case, just as the tree stands in its position. Instructing the mountain spirit not to move away when people plow the earth or dig into the land, Anyo declares in a lyrical fashion that the descendants of Alu are making a promise that is as good as gold and silver, just as the glaciers are the promise of the cliff. This is sort of a beauteous lyrical line to make you think of sort of jewels. Confirming that the whole family has the protection of their ancestors and the mountain spirit, including for their speech and actions, Anya reiterates the request that the request should be fulfilled and their dreams made a reality, and his list of wished-for items is then presented. They want the wool of ewes, the meat of sows, and eggs from hens, along with a pleasing statement to the mountain spirit that, hey, they only burn wood taken from straight trees. This tends to be less ecologically destructive to the mountain spirit's terrain because these trees are often already dying or dead when they're really straight. However, Anyo makes it clear that his wish list is selective when stating they don't want the disputes associated with Ganluo County in the Liangshan Autonomous Prefecture of Sichuan Province, nearby, famous for its history of disputes between many native chieftains. To conclude, he adds that the descendants of Alu wish for white hair and old age, shiny teeth and youth, to be stable as though standing on a great stone, or firm as though holding on to a great tree. And emphatically, he asks for the requests to be fulfilled and their dreams made a reality. So things move more quickly in the third part of the sacrifice. It's devoted to sending back the mountain spirit. And here Anyo explains the mountain spirit, he says to it, that while it came when they summoned, invited, and invoked it, they now wish for it to return to its station. Calling it by name, Anyo asks the Wujia mountain spirit to please return to its position and not move when people plow the earth or dig the land, stating that they wish for the mountain spirit to now return, just as the mare's yew and the stone return to their positions. Anyo reiterates that the request should be fulfilled and their dreams made a reality. He states that the descendants of Alu hope to have healthy and many livestock, be healthy themselves, have many livestock, and be so lucky as to find those same easy hunting catches mentioned in the previous two parts of the sacrifice. He then requests that when the mountain spirit returns to its station, everyone at the sacrifice will also come across those ownerless horses on the road, delicious feasts when visiting neighbors, good business in the marketplace, books bound with gold and silver. Their wishes of having white hair in old age and shiny teeth in youth are repeated with a flattering reminder that they only take the straight road and only burn the wood of straight trees. Declaring they ask the ewe for its wool and that the ox that pulls its plows ask that for some grain, Anya repeats the request of the sow for its meat, the hen for its eggs, and not to have the disputes associated with Gonwall County, but to instead have white hair and age and shiny teeth and youth. You're seeing all these recurrent themes again and again. It makes it easy for the layperson to remember this text. With one last request that the mountain spirit return to its station, Anya affirms it will come when they summon, invite, and invoke it again, and that once it's sent back to its station, it will not move when people plow the earth or dig into the land. Sacrifice, they echo the opening refrain and many other parts within it. He launches into it by repeating it's a good month, year, and day in the Nulsu calendar. The 12 animals of the astrological cycle are all in a good state of affairs. Then he reaffirms at this point that the descendants of Alu, Vati, Jazulunder, and himself worshipped the mountain spirit last year and they're worshiping it this year. Stating the sacrifice is ended, he tells the mountain spirit that the fragrance of the wine still lingers, the flavor of the meat is still strong, and that this is all offered to it. Then he asks the mountain spirit to return to its station. He notes it's a lucky day, night, month, and year when it's in place. He points to the fulfillment of the requests and dreams and observes that the grain is plentiful, the crops stand tall, the fruits are abundant, the shelves of grains are filled with seeds, and the fodder stores are all full. People are healthy. They will find the same easy hunting catches that were already mentioned in the sacrifice, as well as those ownerless horses on the road, delicious feasts when visiting neighbors, good business in the marketplace, books bound with gold and silver. He reminds the mountain spirit they worshipped it last year and this year, that in each annual sacrifice is offered food and drink, shimmering tea and fragrant wine, tempting the mountain spirit to return, as in the future. He describes the roasted meat and tea bricks piled up high, adding that the livestock, wild animals, and birds love the salt on the roasted meat. The imagery is embellished further by his observation that the livestock become extremely happy when eating the white salt from the south, while the wild animals and birds become extremely happy when eating the black salt from the north. At this point, there's just a few more poetic lines to speak, which Anyo brings into focus, along with the responsive relationships between all parties to the sacrificial contract. Making one last show of deference, he tells the mountain spirit that after it's been offered salted meat, it should destroy the grains and livestock of anyone who tears off its ground cover, cuts down its trees, digs up its herbs on any side of its terrain. He reminds the mountain spirit one last time that as the descendants of Alu have worshipped it last year and this year, their request shall be fulfilled and their dreams should be made a reality. In drawing the sacrifice to a close, he affirms that the whole family has the protection of the ancestors and the mountain spirit, that they only take the straight road and burn wood from straight trees. They ask the ewe for its wool, the ox to help pull plows for grain, the hen for its eggs, not to get the disputes from Gonlo County. Their family speech and actions are all said to have the protection of the ancestors and mountain spirit. And the final rhetorical move that evokes the responsive relation between people and mountain spirits is that Anyo calls out that the father is loved by his children, the children are looked after by the father, the grandfather is loved by his grandchildren, and the grandchildren are looked after by the grandfather, and that he wants their requests to be fulfilled and their dreams to be made a reality. So through this kind of sacrifice to the Wodja mountain spirit, Anya beseeches it to make the most of its dream-fulfilling properties as a kind of father to the Nulsu people living in its terrain. He echoes a priestly scripture for the sacrifice, and he requests that the descendants of Alu receive all these traditional forms of protection that we've just been talking about before. An important feature of the invocation is the mutually responsive relation between the mountain spirit and the descendants of Alu, whose ongoing sacrifices are described as being traceable back to the grandparents' generation. This is in fact an accurate reflection of how long they and other Nulsu have inhabited the area after pushing the Wang family out. And each of these requests falls in line with Nulsu imaginaries of their own traditional or generation by generation connection to mountain stroke land spirits, and indeed their connections to the whole cosmology of ancestors, gods, culture heroes, ghosts, and multitudes of other spirits that are ideally often kept in balance by the ritual chanting of priests. By creatively drawing on his imaginary of how priests make sacrifices to the mountain spirits, Anil melds his own vision of the priestly approach to scriptures and chanting with his own sacrificial delivery. Okay, but he does go a step further by ensuring that the terms of the sacrificial contract are flexed and expanded to include the vicissitudes of the present moment. You'll see here, this is actually quite interesting because it's very close to the topmost part of one of the highest mountains in Ninglang, in Nila, and we're having the people who are actually managing these new energy technologies, burning their rubbish right next to this green initiative. And it's actually, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes drive from one of these heat sensitive cameras that you can span all across the valley and can see this with, a team of some 30 people or something sitting in an office in the county town center watching this, but nonetheless. So When the mountain spirit is asked to renew its annual contract, what we're having here is we're opening up a space for negotiating its terms for the year ahead. And Anya's request that the mountain spirit remain in place, even when breaking the classic taboo of digging into or plowing up the mountain spirit's territory, is meant to apply as much to the traditional agriculture or forestry practices, right, tilling under the soil or felling trees, as it is to modern disturbances, including the digging of trenches or the drilling of pilings required to install those new energy technologies. Also, each time the mountain spirit is asked to maintain that responsive relationship to the family by fulfilling requests and making dreams a reality, we're having injected a nearly kind of limitless flexibility into the sacrificial contract. Because requests and dreams may be boundless, especially when they're built on new things, new ideas, new opportunities, like using wind turbines and solar panels and stuff like that. But it's one thing to ensure that the scope of a contract is flexible enough to make boundless requests, and it's another thing for those requests to actually be fulfilled. So bringing boundless requests, or even just a few of them, to fruition requires expanding not only the sacrificial contract between people and mountain spirits, but also the social lives of all of these things. Many ordinary Nulsu people like Anyo therefore set out to foster responsive relations with their mountain spirits that are meant to unfold in dream-fulfilling ways. Do I have like 3 minutes to? I will very quickly just wrap up. I'm aware that we know we need some time to let others speak, but I'll be just quick. So making the leap from fostering responsive relations to shaping the social lives of imposing things. Imposing things include not only mountain spirits or new energy technologies, but often dreams, dream lives. This could be a tall order anywhere. But in the present history of Liangshan's transition to renewable resources, many priests, shamans, and ordinary people find that agreeing sacrificial contracts with mountain spirits is in fact needed to make their dreams become a reality. Right? This is a key line in the whole sacrifice as well. Mountain spirits have the power to make Nulsu lives abundant, or alternatively, to abandon their terrain if they are disturbed. So balancing the relations between people and mountain spirits is an important part of the whole ecology of Liangshan. Yeah, maybe the whole part of the Shengtai Wenming of this area, at least, right? Where new energy technologies, the mountain spirits part of it, where new energy technologies are often rolled out in locations that won't disturb those mountain spirits. Remember that image before of the whole mountain area all had one, except for one mountain had no wind turbine because that's where the mountain spirit lived? So to maintain this, we could call cosmo-ecological balance, it has a bit of cosmos and a bit of ecology together. Many Nulsu people exhort their mountain spirits to remain in place rather than leave with sacrifices that meld the rhetoric of priestly scriptures with the intonation of priestly chanting, even if it's done by an ordinary person, who puts text and voice in a relation of mutual adjustment and responsivity that parallels the relations they seek to build between people and mountain spirits. So ordinary Nulsu people like Anyo often build on their impressions, actually their imaginations, rather than any mastery of priestly scriptures. When they foster those responsive relations with mountain spirits, they have to improvise on the scriptures and chants of priests, right? They don't do these routinely. They're not priests themselves, and they improvise on them when they are holding these sacrificial contracts, making them. They set out to breathe renewed life into previous sacrificial contracts in so doing. And to this end, they approach their local mountain spirits with scriptural voicings that meld this poetic wording, lilt, and cadence of the priestly text with their own imaginative deliveries on them and their own imaginative sort of additions, like that thing about, hey, if somebody tears off your clothes to the mountain spirit, you can make them insane, for example. So some ordinary people may creatively supplement this kind of script orality with their experiences of addressing various ancestors, gods, and spirits during the fire festival, New Year, the other rituals that don't require a priest or shaman. They can harness those performative ways of reciting popular myth histories and legends and things like that. And in every case, the voice and text are used to respond to each other like the way people and their spirits, in this case, mountain spirits, are encouraged to do. So it brings me to my final point on how Nulsu may use scriptural voicings to build a more livable future, perhaps, right, in this era of climate change. Despite the increasing visibility of climate change across Liangshan, it's mostly manifest in the form of forest fires or landslides. Many Nulsu are still, nonetheless, not entirely convinced of the value that renewable energy sources may bring, because wind turbines, solar panels, electricity pylons, they can make up for that unsettling feeling they're going to disturb mountain spirits, make them abandon the terrain, deprive people of one of their most, and for some people, arguably the most important cosmological resource, which is the mountain spirit. At the same time, new energy technologies are being rolled out at a pace like this is not necessarily local people's decisions, that many Nulsu suspect will force those mountain spirits to either move home or become accepting of these new technologies. So the solution is often to work harder at convincing a mountain spirit to stay in place, even when its train's being dug into, plowed, or otherwise compromised by the arrival of those imposing technologies. By melding the script into voice, allowing themselves to kind of combine them, many Nulsu bind their mountain spirit to a sacrificial contract, to the responsive relations that go with it, and to the expectation that their requests will be fulfilled, and in fact, their dreams will be made a reality. And is this not a boundless way of giving voice to the social lives of dreams? Thank you very much.